I never really thought about mental health until I couldn't ignore it anymore. It wasn't a sudden breakdown. It was subtle, like a slow leak in the ceiling that you pretend not to see until it trickles into a flood. I remember staring at my phone for hours, waiting for a text, any distraction, while feeling like I was drowning in a pool that no one else could see. I smiled. I showed up. I made the grades. Yet something was wrong, like I was living underwater in a world that constantly asked me to sprint. But here's the thing. My story isn't unique. In fact, it's very common. We live in a world that tells us to push harder, to smile through the chaos, to keep going even when we're falling apart inside. But no one teaches us how to sit with sadness, how to recognize anxiety, or even how to say, I think something is wrong. So maybe we should start from scratch. What is mental health? Forget Instagram posts and overused hashtags for a second. Mental health isn't always positive. It's not about being happy or sipping tea in a bubble bath. Mental health is about how we think, how we feel, and how we process life. Mental health shapes our relationships, our reactions, and the quiet moments when we're alone with our thoughts. Mental health isn't just for sick people. Mental health is for everyone. Because everyone has a mind, everyone feels, everyone struggles, and everyone deserves to be okay. The confusion comes when we confuse two things, mental health and mental illness. They're related, but not the same. Think about it this way. Everyone has physical health. That doesn't mean everyone gets cancer. You can get a cold, or a headache, or just feel unwell for a few days. The same goes for mental health. You can feel stressed, anxious, emotionally drained, without needing to be diagnosed with a disorder. But those moments matter. They deserve attention. Because when ignored, they grow into something deeper, heavier, harder to untangle. What makes this harder is that mental health isn't something we can see. You break your leg, people run to sign your splint, but tell someone you're struggling inside, and they might say you're being dramatic, overreacting, weak. And that's the trap, because most people who are struggling don't look like they're hurting. They look like they're functioning. They show up to work. They tell jokes. They post pictures. But inside, they're in survival mode. Pretending is part of the job description when the world tells you that suffering should be hidden. You've probably felt it. The hesitation before telling a friend you're not okay. The fear that they'll shun you or look at you differently. The little voice in your head that whispers that you're the problem. You're not. But stigma makes us believe that getting help is a failure. And that lie has hurt more people than we can count. But let's stop here. Because this story isn't just about pain. It's about understanding, and maybe even hope. Mental health isn't a weakness. It's not a flaw. It's part of being human. Like joy, like love, like fear, when we embrace it, we begin to see people more fully, including ourselves. We begin to see the emotional wounds that echo across generations. How cultures that glorify toughness often punish weakness. Saying, "Get over it," has never healed anyone. But change doesn't start with society. It starts with the little things. With a question, with a story. With one person who dares to say, "I feel overwhelmed. I need a break. I'm not okay." And that's okay. That's where this journey begins. Because understanding mental health isn't about memorizing definitions. It's about seeing it in real life. It's the kid who skips school not because they're lazy, but because anxiety makes their stomach churn every morning. It's the parent who loves their child deeply, but can't shake the numbness that comes with having a child. It's the teenager who laughs in a group chat while secretly writing goodbye letters at night. It's real. and it's all around us. And here's the thing that no one talks about enough. There's no normal way to feel. There's no single blueprint for the human experience. Sometimes we're happy. Sometimes we're... America is a country that prides itself on freedom, on progress, on innovation. We land rovers on Mars, build skyscrapers that kiss the clouds, and turn billion-dollar ideas into apps you can download in seconds. And yet, for all that advancement, there's one conversation we still hesitate to have, the one about mental health. In a society that idolizes independence, toughness, and the hustle, admitting that you're not okay still feels like betrayal. Not just to others, but to the very image of what it means to be American. To understand why, we need to go back, not just decades, but centuries. The American spirit was built on survival, on grit. The early settlers braved wilderness, war, and disease. Admitting weakness, that wasn't an option. Vulnerability meant danger. You either pushed through, or you didn't survive. That legacy didn't vanish, it evolved. Today, it shows up in subtle ways, in the dad who works 3 jobs and never complains. In the mom who holds the family together while silently falling apart. In the teenager who's told to toughen up instead of being asked what's wrong. The American dream promises that with hard work, anything is possible. But here's the shadow side of that dream. If you're struggling, it must be your fault. You must not be working hard enough. You must not want it badly enough. And when this mindset seeps into mental health, it becomes dangerous. Depression is seen as laziness, anxiety as weakness. Therapy? That's for people who can't handle life. And so, we keep quiet. We've built a culture of masks. You show up to work smiling, no matter how shattered you feel. You keep the family photo on the mantle while pretending everything's okay. You post the vacation photos, the milestones, the wins. Never the breakdowns. Never the nights you couldn't sleep. Never the mornings you couldn't get out of bed. Because somewhere along the way, being human became something to hide. And social media has only turned up the volume. In curated feeds filled with filtered happiness, there's little room for pain. We scroll through highlight reels and compare them to our unfiltered reality. That comparison breeds shame. And shame is a silencer. The more we believe everyone else has it together, the more broken we feel by comparison. But the truth is, no one is immune. The college valedictorian, the CEO, the loving parent, they can all struggle. They do. They just don't always say it out loud. And then there's the language we use. How often have you heard someone say, "I'm so OCD," because they like things neat? Or, "I'm depressed," because they're having a bad day. These throwaway comments blur the lines between real conditions and casual emotion. They diminish real suffering. And when someone does try to speak up, they risk being misunderstood, dismissed, or worse, judged. But it's not just casual conversation. The systems are part of the problem too. In America, mental health care is expensive, fragmented, and often hard to access. For millions, therapy is a luxury, not a right. Insurance might cover a checkup for your body, but not your mind. And for communities of color, the problem runs even deeper. Historical trauma, cultural stigma, and lack of access create a triple barrier. If you're Black, Indigenous, Latino, or Asian in America, the message is often clear. We don't talk about this. We pray, we push through, we survive. I once spoke to a friend, smart, funny, ambitious, who told me he hadn't cried in over 10 years, not because he hadn't felt pain, but because he believed tears were a sign of failure. He had internalized the lesson taught to so many boys. Emotions are dangerous. Vulnerability is feminine. And masculinity, in the American script, is all about control. But here's the irony. We are a nation drowning in the very thing we refuse to name. Anxiety is now the most common mental health condition in the U.S. Suicide is one of the leading causes of death, especially among teens and veterans. Loneliness is being called the next public health crisis. And yet, so many suffer in silence, pretending it's all fine. Why? Because we still reward the performance over the truth. We cheer for the comeback story, but rarely ask what it cost. We admire resilience, but often mistake it for silence. We tell people to just reach out, but rarely create spaces where reaching out feels safe. The taboo isn't just cultural, it's personal. It's the inner voice that says, "You should be over this by now." It's the fear that if you speak up, people will pull away. It's the shame that convinces you you're the only one feeling this way. But here's what's real. You are not the only one. And the moment we start telling the truth, that becomes obvious. Because behind the facade, there are stories. Real ones. Like the high school quarterback who quietly takes anti-anxiety meds before every game. The single mother who schedules therapy during her lunch break so her kids won't know. The veteran who looks fine on the outside but wakes up screaming from memories he can't erase. The stories are everywhere. We've just taught ourselves not to listen. But what if we did? What if instead of flinching at the words depression or trauma, we leaned in? What if we stopped asking people to just be strong and started showing up when they're not? What if we taught our children that their feelings are not failures, but signals? What if we made mental health as normal to discuss as a sore throat? That's how taboos lose power, not overnight, but conversation by conversation, story by story, one brave truth at a time. There's a moment, quiet, barely noticeable, when someone gives up. It doesn't look like what we imagine. No dramatic farewell, no tearful goodbye. Sometimes it's just a sigh, a message left unread, a door locked a little too long, and by the time we realize something's wrong, it's already too late. This is the cost of silence, not in theory, in real life. I remember a boy from my high school, let's call him Ryan. Smart, funny, the kind of kid everyone liked, but no one really knew. He was on the soccer team, had a girlfriend, made honor roll. From the outside, perfect. But inside, he was drowning. We didn't know until one day, he just stopped showing up. His desk stayed empty, his locker untouched. Rumors swirled, but the truth hit harder than anyone was ready for. Ryan had taken his own life. No note, no warning, just gone. And the saddest part? After he died, everyone had a story. He seemed off lately. He looked tired last week. He said something weird in class, but I thought he was joking. We saw the signs. We just didn't listen. Or maybe we did, but didn't know what to do with them. And now? A boy with a future became a memory we couldn't make peace with. Ryan's story isn't rare. It's painfully, horribly common. Every year in the U.S., over 45,000 people die by suicide. That's one every 11 minutes. It's the second leading cause of death for people aged 10 to 34. Let that sink in. In a country full of opportunity, freedom, and progress, some of our brightest minds and kindest hearts are choosing to leave. And most of them never told anyone they were thinking about it. But suicide is only one piece of the price we pay. There's also the silent epidemic of people who are alive, but not really living. The millions walking through life numb, disconnected, and quietly in pain. They go to work, They care for kids. They laugh at jokes. But inside, they're shrinking, becoming shadows of themselves. We call it burnout. We call it stress. We say, it's just a rough patch. But these phrases are like duct tape on a sinking boat. They cover, not cure. And over time, silence builds pressure until the dam breaks. There's a cost to every "I'm fine" that isn't true. A cost to every child told to man up. Every woman dismissed as too emotional. Every veteran who can't sleep and is told to just move on. We normalize suffering until it becomes invisible, until someone collapses at their desk, until someone lashes out at their partner, until someone disappears into addiction, self-harm, or worse. And then we act shocked. But mental health doesn't explode out of nowhere. It whispers first, in sleep that won't come, in motivation that fades, in joy that disappears without a trace. It's the friend who cancels plans again, the coworker who's suddenly quiet, the sibling who's always tired. These moments are not dramatic, but they are warnings. And when ignored, they become wounds that deepen. Consider this. Untreated depression increases the risk of substance abuse, physical illness, job loss, relationship breakdowns, even early death. Anxiety can spiral into panic disorders. PTSD can destroy families. And for children, yes, children, the long-term effects of untreated mental distress can last a lifetime. Poor academic performance, broken self-esteem, trust issues, health problems. The list goes on. And what's wild is, we know this. We've seen it. We've read the headlines. We've heard the cries for help. But still, so many go unheard. Because the stigma tells them, stay quiet. Because workplaces value productivity over people. Because schools focus on grades, not well-being. Because families sometimes love in silence, but fear in noise. Even the healthcare system reflects this silence. Did you know most general doctors in America have less than 2 weeks of training in mental health during med school? That many people wait months to see a therapist? That psychiatric beds are vanishing while ERs are flooded with people in mental crisis who have nowhere else to go? And still, we expect people to just figure it out. We wouldn't treat cancer this way. We wouldn't tell someone with a broken leg to just walk it off. But when someone's mind is hurting, we ask them to be tougher, to smile more, to pray harder, to be grateful. We weaponize positivity. We reward performance, and we punish truth. I spoke to a woman once, a nurse. She said the hardest part of her job wasn't the wounds she could see. It was the ones she couldn't fix. A 14-year-old girl who tried to overdose. A retired firefighter who hadn't slept more than 2 hours a night in years. A mother who lost her son, not to violence, but to silence. The nurse said the pain didn't scare her. The silence did. Because silence kills. But here's the thing. It doesn't have to. What if Ryan had been asked, not, "What's wrong with you?" but, "What are you carrying?" What if instead of dismissing mood swings, we got curious about them? What if schools taught kids emotional first aid the same way they teach CPR? What if parents modeled openness instead of perfection? What if therapy wasn't a last resort, but a standard resource? The cost of silence is steep, but the value of connection is greater. You can't always save someone, but you can see them. You can show up. You can check in. And sometimes that small act is the bridge between despair and hope. We say we care. We need to prove it. Not in hashtags, not in awareness months, but in the day-to-day choices to listen, to ask, to notice, and to speak. Because silence doesn't just break people. It breaks communities. And it's time we stopped paying the price. They say, but you don't look depressed. As if pain always has a face. As if struggle shows up with messy hair, tears, or missed deadlines. But what about the people who still wake up, still smile, still meet their quotas, crack jokes, make it to dinner, and go home to cry in silence? This is the myth of high-functioning mental illness, the invisible performance. The quiet war. Meet Elise. On paper, she had everything. An Ivy League degree, a top-tier marketing job, a condo with skyline views. She was the one people called for advice, the one who made plans, who always showed up. Even when she couldn't get out of bed without forcing her limbs to move like they weighed tons. Even when she cried in the shower every morning, timing her tears so they wouldn't make her late. Elise had depression. Deep, chemical, suffocating depression. But she also had deadlines. So she kept going. That's the thing about high functioning. It's not a type of mental illness. It's a coping style. One that says, as long as I'm productive, no one will know I'm breaking. But it's also a trap. Because success becomes the mask. The more you accomplish, the more invisible your suffering becomes. People look at you and say, you're so strong. When in fact, you're exhausted. Not just physically, existentially. There's a cruel irony here. High-functioning individuals are less likely to be offered help because they appear too capable. They're also more likely to be dismissed when they finally speak up. Really? But you're always so upbeat. That disbelief invalidates them, makes them question whether their pain is even real. That self-doubt? It's another layer of torment. Then there's the issue of internal guilt. People like Elise often feel ashamed for struggling. After all, what do I have to be sad about? They gaslight themselves. Compare their suffering to others' trauma and decide theirs is illegitimate. So they push it down, again and again, until the mask cracks. This myth hurts men too, especially. We celebrate the stoic male, the provider, the man who never cries, never needs, never wavers. He gets things done. He keeps it together. But what happens when he's quietly unraveling inside? One man I interviewed, a 39-year-old lawyer, said the scariest part of his depression wasn't the sadness. It was the numbness. I'd argue a case flawlessly, he said, and then sit in my car for an hour afterwards, unable to feel anything. Not pride, not relief, nothing. Just emptiness. No one at his firm knew. They called him the Rock. But inside he was sinking. That's what people don't get. High functioning doesn't mean mild. It means hidden, silent, dangerous. People don't seek help until they crash. And when they crash, the fall is steep, because no one expected it. There's a cultural aspect to this too. In America especially, where productivity is currency, we value doing over being. We love stories of people who overcome, power through, hustle hard. Rest is often treated as laziness. Vulnerability? Weakness. So people wear burnout like a badge of honor. I haven't had a day off in months. I only sleep 4 hours a night. It's glamorized self-destruction, all while the soul begs for mercy. The high-functioning myth also exists in communities of color, where strength and survival are passed down as armor. If you're Black, Asian, Latino, Indigenous, you may have grown up hearing, "Don't air your dirty laundry. Be strong for the family. Therapies for white folks. Pray on it." That stoicism has roots in real survival. But it becomes toxic when it silences healing. And let's talk about women, especially working mothers. The world calls them superhuman, multitaskers, queens of resilience. They manage homes, raise children, meet targets, care for aging parents, and hide their panic attacks in bathroom stalls. They're told, "You're amazing." But no one asks if they're okay. No one sees the shaking hands under the table, the days skipped eating, the silent scream behind their eyes. What does this all tell us? That functioning is not proof of wellness, and silence is not proof of strength. We need to redefine what strength looks like. It's not always stoic. Sometimes it's messy. Sometimes it's saying, "I need help." It's showing up to therapy. It's calling a friend. It's canceling a meeting because you're overwhelmed. That's real courage. That's real power. We also need to stop waiting for collapse before we care. Mental health shouldn't only matter when someone breaks down. It should matter in the tiny, invisible cracks. The quiet moments when someone says, "I'm tired," and we ask, "Tired how?" The moments when someone says, "I'm fine," and we pause to say, "You sure?" Because the strongest looking people might be the ones closest to the edge. And unless we make space for their truth, we risk losing them, not just to suicide, but to life lived half alive. So if you see someone who seems like they've got it all together, check on them. If you are that person, check in with yourself. You don't need to earn your right to rest. You don't have to be falling apart to deserve care. You're allowed to be both strong and struggling. And you're allowed to stop pretending. It sounds harmless, even kind. Just think positive. Good vibes only. Everything happens for a reason. These words are painted on mugs, printed on t-shirts, captioned under Instagram selfies framed by sunshine and smoothies. But what happens when someone's world is falling apart and all they're handed is a hashtag? This is the shadow side of positivity. When light is forced and feelings are filtered. It's called toxic positivity. And it's more common than we like to admit. Let me tell you about Marcus. He lost his younger brother in a motorcycle accident. Grief swallowed him whole. The pain came in waves. Guilt, anger, emptiness, disorientation. But when he tried to open up to his co-workers, one of them smiled awkwardly and said, "At least he's in a better place now." Another texted him, "Stay strong. Your brother would want you to be happy." They meant well. But to Marcus, it felt like being told, "Stop crying. Don't make us uncomfortable." So he stopped talking, stopped showing, until eventually he stopped feeling. That's what toxic positivity does. It invalidates pain by skipping over it. It replaces empathy with platitudes. It turns discomfort into something to be silenced rather than something to be witnessed. Real positivity is about hope with honesty. It's a light that doesn't erase darkness, but shines through it. Toxic positivity, on the other hand, demands performance. You're not just expected to be okay, you're expected to smile about it. And if you don't, you risk being seen as ungrateful, negative, or weak. We see this everywhere, especially online. Social media has turned happiness into a branding tool. People curate their lives with sunshine filters, aesthetic desks, and couples yoga. And when someone breaks the script, when someone posts something raw or messy, the comments pour in, sending light and love. Focus on the positive. Or worse, silence. The kind that says, "You've ruined the vibe." In this culture, struggle becomes a secret. Vulnerability becomes taboo. And those who are suffering start to feel like outcasts or failures. Think about how we talk to children. When a kid says, "I'm sad," how often do we say, "Don't be sad," instead of asking, "Tell me why"? We learn young that emotions make people uncomfortable, that sadness is something to hide, that tears make us less lovable. By the time we're adults, We've internalized the message. Only happy people deserve attention. But we weren't meant to be happy all the time. We were built for the full spectrum. Joy, sadness, anger, fear, grief, love. They all belong. To cut one out is to sever part of your humanity. The irony is, the more we suppress the negative feelings, the more they control us. What you resist persists. Bury your sadness, and it seeps into your body. You get tension headaches, insomnia, irritability. Your chest tightens. Your appetite changes. You snap at loved ones over nothing. You feel numb during things that used to light you up. But you keep smiling, because that's what you've been taught. Toxic positivity also shows up in the workplace. Burnt-out employees are told to practice gratitude instead of being given fair hours. People struggling with mental illness are told to go for a walk instead of being offered proper health care. These dismissals masquerade as encouragement, but they're avoidance. They shift responsibility back onto the sufferer, as if struggle is a mindset flaw instead of a systemic issue. Even spirituality isn't immune. Many New Age teachings have been co-opted into a culture of spiritual bypassing. Everything happens for a reason. Raise your vibration. You manifested this. While those ideas can be comforting, they can also be dangerous when used to blame people for their trauma. Imagine telling someone who just survived abuse, "You attracted this energy." That's not healing. That's cruelty in a pretty package. So how do we fight back against toxic positivity? First, by embracing emotional honesty. When someone says, "I'm struggling," resist the urge to fix it. Just say, "I'm here," or "That sounds hard." Validation is not weakness, it's medicine. Second, we need to model emotional diversity. That means sharing not just the wins, but the in-betweens. The tears, the doubts, the days when we're not okay. When someone sees us survive those days, it gives them permission to survive theirs. Third, we need to stop treating discomfort as a problem to solve. Discomfort is part of growth, part of truth. It's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel scared. Those emotions carry information. They tell us what matters, what's missing, what needs healing. I remember a woman named Celeste who was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. People around her kept saying, "Be strong, you've got this." But one day, she broke down and told her sister, "I'm tired of pretending I'm brave all the time. Sometimes I'm just scared." Her sister held her hand and said, "Then be scared. I'll sit with you in it." That moment, Celeste said, was the first time she felt truly seen. Because that's the difference between light that blinds and light that warms. One erases the shadows. The other lets you breathe inside them. So maybe the goal isn't to be positive all the time. Maybe the goal is to be real, and to hold space for others to be real too. If someone you love is hurting, don't rush to cheer them up. Be still, be soft, be present. If you're the one hurting, don't shame yourself for not feeling okay. You're not broken, you're human. And humanity isn't made of good vibes only, it's made of truth. In every culture, there are things we don't say out loud. Secrets that sit just beneath the dinner table, buried between polite smiles and small talk. And one of the loudest silences we all share is this: mental health. We whisper about it. We joke nervously about it. We say someone is just going through a phase, or needs to toughen up, or probably overthinking it. But rarely do we name it plainly. Depression, anxiety, trauma, bipolar disorder, OCD, PTSD. The stigma isn't always in the words. Sometimes it's in the pause after them. The shift in eye contact. The change of subject. The look that says, "We don't talk about that here." And that's how silence becomes contagious. We learn not to speak, not because we don't need help, but because we're afraid of what speaking might cost us. I want to tell you about Layla. She was in college, top of her class, bright future ahead. But something was off. She stopped sleeping. Her thoughts spiraled. She felt like she was drowning in invisible quicksand. When she finally told her parents she thought she might be depressed, her mother blinked and said, "We don't have that in our family." Her father added, "You're just being dramatic." That night, Layla stopped trying to explain herself. Not because the feelings went away, but because she realized her truth wasn't welcome. This is what stigma does. It builds a wall between the pain and the people who are supposed to help you through it. And the worst part? It teaches you to build that wall yourself. In many families, especially in immigrant, Black, Asian, and Latinx communities, mental health struggles are often framed as weakness, or worse, as a betrayal of the sacrifices made for you. You have food, you have shelter, you're in school. What do you have to be sad about? Becomes a rhetorical question used to shut down rather than open up. This framing not only ignores the reality of mental illness, but also creates a culture where people suffer silently out of guilt. In religion, too, stigma often finds a foothold. Instead of therapy, people are told to pray harder. Instead of medication, they're told to rebuke the spirit. While faith can be deeply healing, when it's used to deny the legitimacy of psychological pain, it becomes a barrier to real care. And let's not ignore schools, places that claim to shape our future, but often ignore the emotional bleeding behind straight A's. Mental illness among teenagers is skyrocketing. Yet many still get told, "You're just being hormonal," or "You'll grow out of it." Teachers aren't trained, counselors are overwhelmed, and so young people turn to TikTok and Reddit before they turn to adults, because at least there, they feel seen. The media doesn't help either. Mental illness is either demonized, turning people with schizophrenia into horror movie villains, or romanticized like a tragic artist trope. But in reality, mental illness isn't just one dramatic moment. It's 1,000 quiet battles a day. Getting out of bed, eating when you're not hungry, smiling when you want to scream. And when those battles are invisible, people assume you're fine. This invisibility is what makes stigma so dangerous. If you break your leg, no one says, "Have you tried being more positive?" But if your mind breaks, suddenly you're blamed for it. And that blame keeps people from asking for help, keeps people from reaching out, keeps people from living. I remember reading a story about a boy named Adrian who posted online, "I don't want to be alive anymore." The post got a few likes, a couple laughing emojis, and then was buried by memes. 2 days later, he died by suicide. No one took him seriously. No one checked in. They thought he was being dramatic. They thought if it were real, he'd say it differently. That's the thing about stigma. It doesn't just silence people. It teaches us not to hear them. There's also the fear of being labeled. Once someone knows you've been depressed, suddenly everything you do is seen through that lens. If you cry, it's your illness. If you're happy, it's just a good day. If you speak up, you're unstable. People want you to be open about your mental health, but the moment you are, you become your diagnosis. And that identity can become a cage. Workplaces are no exception. Many employees hide their therapy appointments under fake meetings. They lie about needing a mental health day because they know it won't be respected, like a sick day for the flu. They fear that if they admit to struggling, they'll be seen as unreliable, or worse, replaceable. So we lie. We smile. We say we're tired instead of saying we're unraveling. And the more we lie, the more alone we feel. But here's the thing. Stigma only survives in silence. When we speak, we weaken it. When we share, we strip its power. When we listen without judgment, we make it harder for shame to grow. Think of the moment Simone Biles stepped back from the Olympics to protect her mental health. Some people applauded her courage. Others called her selfish. But she didn't back down. And because of that, millions of people saw a new possibility. That choosing your mind over medals is strength, not failure. Stigma wants you to believe you're broken, that you should be ashamed, that no one else feels this way. But that's a lie. You're not alone. You've never been. You've just been taught to be quiet. So let's start unlearning. Let's start saying the words out loud. Depression, anxiety, trauma. Let them be as normal in our vocabulary as flu, fever, or asthma. Let therapy be talked about like training for a marathon, not because something's wrong with you, but because you want to grow stronger. And most importantly, let's stop asking people to prove their pain. If someone says they're struggling, believe them. They don't owe you receipts. Their courage is in their confession. Because the real question isn't, why don't people speak up? It's, why did we make them afraid to? Everyone loves a comeback story. The fall, the moment of crisis, and then the triumphant return. Cue the montage, the therapy sessions, the morning jogs, the green smoothies, the motivational quote posts. And finally, the smile that says, I'm back and I'm better. But real healing? It rarely looks like that. There's no background music, no neat 3-act structure. And sometimes, the comeback is just waking up and deciding to try again. Healing is not linear. That's the truth they forget to tell you. It doesn't move in a straight upward line. It zigzags. It collapses. It crawls. You can be doing fine for weeks, and then suddenly feel like you've fallen all the way back to day one. But here's what matters. You haven't. Let me tell you about Marcus. After years of bottling up trauma from his childhood, he finally went to therapy. The first few months felt revolutionary. He was finally unpacking things, understanding himself, sleeping better. Then, out of nowhere, came a panic attack. One of the worst he'd ever had. He thought he was broken again, that everything he'd worked on had vanished. But when he told his therapist, they said something that stuck with him forever. Healing isn't about avoiding the fall. It's about knowing how to get back up. There is no finish line in mental health. No final boss to defeat. There's just the work, the maintenance, the awareness, and above all, the grace you learn to give yourself. We live in a culture obsessed with productivity and results. Even our healing has to perform. People expect you to get over it quickly, to be okay again so they can be comfortable. So you smile. You post selfies. You say, I'm good, even when you're crumbling, because you don't want to disappoint their version of your recovery. Social media makes it worse. You see influencers posting about beating anxiety with yoga or curing depression through cold plunges. And while those things can help, they aren't magic wands. Healing isn't a product you can buy. It's not a vibe. It's not aesthetic. Sometimes it's sobbing in your car between errands. Sometimes it's saying no to plans you were excited for because your brain just won't let you leave the house that day. And yet, we still cling to the idea that there's a right way to heal, that we're failing if we're not constantly improving. But emotional wounds are like physical ones. Some leave scars, some reopen, some take longer than others. No one blames you if your leg still hurts after surgery. So why do we shame people when their depression doesn't vanish after a month of meds? The myth of the quick fix is dangerous because it breeds shame. If your healing doesn't look like someone else's, you start to think you're doing it wrong, that you're weak, that maybe you're unfixable. But you're not. You're human. And humans are messy. Healing isn't a race, it's a rhythm. Some days it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Other days it's all steps sideways. That doesn't mean you're stuck. It means you're still dancing. Take Alina, for example. She had been diagnosed with PTSD after surviving a violent relationship. She journaled, went to group therapy, started EMDR, and even began painting again. 1 year later, she found herself frozen during a thunderstorm, panicking, reliving it all. And she thought, why now? I was doing so well. But that moment didn't erase her progress. It didn't take her back to the beginning. It was just another wave. Healing doesn't mean you never feel pain again. It means you're learning how to breathe through it. There's this quote I love. You don't have to be fully healed to be worthy of love or joy or rest. So many people put their lives on hold, waiting until they're better to fall in love, to apply for that job, to travel, to laugh. But healing isn't a prerequisite for living. It's something you do alongside it. You don't need to be perfect to be present. You don't need to be cured to be creative. You don't need to have all your stuff figured out to be good at your job, or a kind friend, or a loving parent. We need to stop measuring recovery by how normal someone looks again. Start asking, are they feeling more like themselves? Are they learning what helps them cope? Are they showing up even when it's hard? And let's normalize relapses. Normalize needing more time. Normalize changing your mind about what healing looks like. The goal isn't to never feel sad again. It's to stop fearing your sadness. To stop believing it will destroy you. Think of healing like the ocean. Some days the water's calm, clear, and warm. Other days, it's cold, gray, and stormy. But underneath, the tide is always moving. That movement is healing, even when it feels like stillness. So if you've been feeling stuck, if you're tired, if your anxiety is flaring again, if you thought you were past this, take a breath. You haven't failed. You're just in the part of the story where it gets hard again. But that doesn't mean the story's over. It just means you're human. And being human is the bravest thing you can be. Pain is a language. It speaks in tight chests and sleepless nights, in silences at dinner tables, and in that smile that hides 1,000 screams. But the problem is, most of us never learned how to speak it. Instead, we learned to hide it, to rename it, to cover it with sarcasm, distraction, or ambition. We grew up in cultures that taught us strength was silence, that tears were weakness, that if you couldn't tough it out, you were broken. But pain isn't the enemy. The inability to name it is. We live in a world that is emotionally illiterate. We call everything stress, burnout, or an off day, when in reality, it's often grief, trauma, shame, anxiety, depression, or loneliness. We've blurred the language so much that we don't know how to ask for help without minimizing ourselves. So we say, I'm just tired, when what we mean is, I'm exhausted from pretending I'm okay. Part of healing is learning a new vocabulary, not just the words, but the courage to use them. To say, I'm not fine, and let that be okay. To say, I'm grieving, even when no one has died. Because your joy did, your hope did, your trust in people did. This new language isn't poetic. It's real. It's messy. It's ugly. But it's necessary. Without it, we live in shadows. Misunderstood, misdiagnosed, and mistreated. Think of Leo, A quiet, reserved high school student who never got in trouble, never caused drama. Teachers said he was easy. His friends called him chill. But no one noticed the way he stared at nothing during lunch, the way he walked home slower than everyone else. No one asked why he stopped drawing, because Leo never said anything. He didn't have the words. Not for the weight he felt on his chest every morning. Not for the void. All he had was, "I'm tired." And so, no one knew. Until one day, he disappeared. This is the cost of silence, of lacking the language. When pain goes unnamed, it festers, it isolates. It convinces you that you're alone in a crowd of people who also can't speak their pain. We need a new dictionary, one that includes, "I don't know why I feel this way, but it's real." Or, "I don't need advice, I just need someone to sit with me." Or, "I'm afraid of being a burden, but I'm drowning." Creating this language doesn't happen overnight. It starts small, in homes, in classrooms, in therapy offices, in podcasts and books, in videos like this one. It starts by modeling it. By someone being brave enough to say, "Hey, me too." Not in a cute, catchy hashtag way, but in a soul-level whisper that says, "I see you." Pain doesn't always need a solution. Sometimes it just needs a witness. And when we build spaces that allow people to name their pain, we create possibilities for healing that don't rely on fixing, but on understanding. This new language also means rethinking the labels we use for others. The crazy ex, the dramatic coworker, the moody teenager. These are just other words for someone in pain. When we speak about people's behavior without understanding their backstory, we reduce them to symptoms and forget they are stories. Like Sarah, a middle-aged woman labeled bitter at work because she rarely smiled and didn't engage in chit-chat. What no one knew was that she had lost a child years ago and never fully returned from that grief. Her silence wasn't anger. It was protection. Her distance wasn't rudeness. It was a survival mechanism. If even one person had asked, not, "What's wrong with you?" but, "What happened to you?" maybe she could have spoken. This is why language matters. Because words build bridges or walls. They open doors or shut them. They heal or they harm. And sometimes, it's the difference between life and death. In this new world we're building together, a world that makes space for the messy, the unfinished, the not yet okay. We must teach ourselves and others how to talk about pain in a way that doesn't shame or simplify it. We must normalize not knowing what to say, but choosing to listen anyway. Because when someone says, "I'm fine," but their eyes say otherwise, we have to be the ones who can speak the silent language. Who can answer, "You don't have to be." We need to ask better questions. Instead of, "How are you?" try, "How's your heart today?" Instead of, "Are you over it yet?" ask, "What's still hurting?" These questions don't demand an answer. They create space, a pause, an invitation. And remember, speaking this new language doesn't mean you need to be fluent in psychology. It means being human. Being willing to sit with discomfort, to not fix, to not run away from someone else's ache. Because what we run from in others, we often deny in ourselves. The revolution in mental health won't come from perfect systems or apps or medication alone. It will come from a cultural shift, where pain is no longer hidden and empathy is no longer rare. Where we tell young boys that tears are a form of strength. Where we teach girls that anger is not shameful, but sacred. Where we stop asking people to just move on, and instead sit with them as they learn to carry their scars. Language is power. And now, more than ever, we need that power used not to diagnose, but to connect. To say, "I've been there," or "I haven't," but I want to understand. Because if we can give our pain a voice, it stops screaming in silence. Because if we can write a new narrative, maybe we can finally stop hiding behind the old one. Because if we can name it, we can begin to heal it. Not perfectly, not quickly, but truthfully. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.